We kick things off with a chubby kid getting beaten up at school, and yep, that unfortunate soul is our main character. His name? Well, he's called Nobody. He's a bit of an otaku and has a hard time turning people down. Saying no just isn't his thing. Because of his looks, he was a frequent target for bullies, especially the stronger kids, ever since he was little. As a way to escape this reality, he doubled down on his studies, thinking that once he joined the workforce, people would finally judge him for his skills rather than his appearance. No more being the gross fat otaku. But reality hit him hard. Despite all the studying, he realized he hadn't learned much of real value. He was still just an overweight nerd. And worse, he wasn't even a good student. When graduation came around, the only job he could land was as a sparring partner at a training gym. His physical build was the only thing he had going for him. He didn't have much choice but to take the job. As the saying goes, any road works for someone who's lost. But things weren't all that different from his school days. The setting changed, but the bullying stayed the same. Eventually, he began to wonder, why does everyone keep treating me like this? Just then, someone approached him, his supervisor, Mr. Running, asking for help with this month's report. Our guy, confused, pointed out that he was just a sparring partner. But that clearly wasn't the kind of answer Renning was expecting. So he said he'd take care of it. But that decision only opened the floodgates. More and more people started dumping their work on him. And like I said before, our protagonist has a hard time saying no. Our protagonist had a serious flaw. He couldn't say no. Because of that, he ended up buried under so much work that by the time the next day rolled around, it was already midnight and he still wasn't done. Exhausted, he questioned why he hadn't turned down the extra tasks sooner. After all, none of it was benefiting him. His health had taken a hit. Between stress, lack of sleep, and the beatings he received, his body was on the verge of collapse. That's when he remembered what the doctor told him. He needed to lose weight or he was going to die. Suddenly, death didn't seem so far off. If this really was the end, maybe he should at least call an ambulance, just in case he had a shot at survival. But when he grabbed his phone, he realized his balance had run out. No credits, no calls. If he didn't top it up, his number would be cut off. At that point, he simply accepted his fate. However, before passing away, he felt there was one thing he needed to do. He couldn't die as a disgusting fat otaku. So he decided to pay for a study materials folder. That way, he could leave this world with some peace of mind. And if reincarnation was real, he swore he'd never come back as a gross otaku again. In his dazed state, though, he made a mistake. Instead of deleting the folder, he accidentally sent it straight to his supervisor. The supervisor, surprised, received it in the middle of a meeting. Seeing the label study materials, he opened it, wondering how the report was finished so quickly. As for our protagonist, he didn't die. He was reincarnated, but it wasn't just any rebirth. There was no normal time skip here. Not 5 years, not 10. Try 20,000 years. When we next see him, there's a young woman clinging to his arm. She's asking why he's still up in the mountains when they were supposed to explore the world together. Her name? Tu Shan Xiaoyu, a member of the Demon Fox clan. Yeah, a mouthful. Let's just stick with Xiaoyu. Apparently, his name in this life is still Ling John, just like before. He explains he meant to go explore, but got so focused on training that 2 whole millennia flew by. And although he's not exactly human anymore, he's a demonic being, the young master of his clan. He's still just a regular guy with a bit of strength. The best he can do is climb down the mountain. Oh, and this isn't just any mountain. He's been using it as a giant dumbbell. Yeah, he's done about 10,000 reps with it so far, nothing too fancy. Now, even though he was the heir to the demon sect, things didn't go smoothly. He was eventually cast out and had to hide in the mountains to avoid being hunted by righteous cultivators. If it weren't for Xiao Yu, the little fox demon he once saved, he might have gone mad from isolation. Years of discipline and constant persecution shaped him. Still, it's only now, after all that training, that he realizes he's in a full-blown fantasy world. The thing is, his name, Ling John, literally means without spiritual roots in Chinese. No magic, no spiritual power, nothing. Just raw physical strength. Kinda like Asta from Black Clover. Everyone else has powers, and he's the outlier. That snake he just beat? Yeah, he was planning to eat it. What he didn't know was that it was actually a golden core flood dragon, which he defeated with a single punch. Xiao Yu knew, but didn't say a word. That's just how their dynamic goes. Right then, someone shows up, yelling that the protagonist is a thief, accusing him of stealing the dragon he had intended to kill. This guy is Zhao Xunhuo, an instructor from the Chuanshan Academy. Caught off guard, Ling Jian tries to explain that it wasn't what it looked like, then eventually just apologizes. The instructor, however, sees only a low-level demon and a little fox and declares that someone like Ling Jian deserves death for his insolence. He attacks, launching his sword at him, but Ling Jian casually blocks it with one hand. Even so, deep down, he's still a coward. Despite knowing full well that the instructor was trying to kill him, the protagonist still held back his counterattack and simply apologized. Honestly, unbelievable. It's like he's his own worst enemy. He's ridiculously strong but refuses to act on it. The instructor, stunned, couldn't accept what he just saw. After all, someone with no spiritual roots shouldn't be able to catch a flying sword. So he assumed Xiao Yu must be helping him behind the scenes. Xiao Yu, unbothered, stated that if she did intervene, the old man would be dead already. Caught off guard again, the instructor lashed out, accusing her of arrogance and declared that both she and the protagonist deserved to die. He launched 3 more swords their way, and once again, the protagonist stopped the attack cold. The instructor was starting to lose faith in reality. Yet instead of retaliating, the protagonist apologized again. This time for a different reason, because while he couldn't bring himself to harm Xiao Yu, he could certainly kill the instructor if pushed. Hearing that, Xiao Yu was deeply moved. The protagonist had just taken a stand to protect her. The instructor, thrown to the ground and humiliated, shouted that now the protagonist would die. After all, no one could possibly block so many flying swords. But of course, he did. Again. And for a third time, the protagonist apologized. This time, for catching the swords. Honestly, no one could understand this guy anymore. Judging by the look on the instructor's face, even he was about to give up. And that's exactly what happened. His expression softened completely, and he suddenly claimed it was all a misunderstanding. He politely asked for his swords back and said he'd be leaving. The protagonist obliged and returned them, but perhaps forgetting his own strength, he threw them back so fast they ignited from the friction, exploding on impact. It wasn't out of kindness. He just had a hard time refusing when people asked him for things. By now, the instructor had lost the will to fight, or maybe even the will to live. As the protagonist walked off, he told Xiao Yu they needed to head back and cook that snake for his parents. Xiao Yu, meanwhile, warned the instructor to keep quiet about what happened. Looks like the roles had flipped. Now he was the one who couldn't say no. Back with the protagonist, Xiao Yu returned to his side, while the instructor stood there in shock, wondering what on earth had just happened. Who were these people? It didn't matter. He knew the moment he reported this to the elder of the Chuanshan Academy, hell would break loose. The demon cultivators would pay. Meanwhile, others were whispering that even nascent soul cultivators might fall to this strange young man, though the protagonist still insisted he was nothing more than a regular person. Xiao Yu started questioning if he was actually that stupid. He kept repeating that he was a normal guy with no spiritual roots. That's why he trained his body so intensely. Honestly, I'm with Xiao Yu on this one. Maybe he doesn't need more training. But even while they were talking, he kept working out. Xiao Yu might not have noticed, probably because she found him charming in his cluelessness. The protagonist had made up his mind. No matter the risks, he wasn't going to stay trapped in that dense forest any longer. Whether he ended up hunted, wounded, or even killed, it didn't matter. He couldn't remain in hiding forever. The other demons, however, were panicking. Leaving the mountain felt like suicide. If he crossed paths with a righteous cultivator, they'd see right away just how weak he was. But then Xiao Yu spoke up. They had already encountered a righteous cultivator. One at the nascent soul stage, no less, and the protagonist had taken him down with a single punch. Hearing that, his father couldn't believe how much his son's strength had grown. Still, he reminded him that without spiritual roots, it didn't matter how strong he got, he'd always be at a disadvantage. Defeating one or two nascent soul cultivators didn't mean he was invincible. But the protagonist wasn't chasing invincibility. His only goal was to reach the stage of heavenly tribulation. Only then could he break the cursed seal that kept all of them trapped. The problem was, stuck in that cursed forest, he couldn't even push past the body refinement stage. Hearing this, his father turned to everyone and asked if anyone had mentioned this to him before. The protagonist went on, saying that over the past 20,000 years, even sealed away, his father had always protected him. Now it was his turn to protect his father. That's when Zhao Yu pointed out something everyone had overlooked. Since he was still at the body refinement stage, he hadn't developed any demonic aura. Meaning, unless he declared himself a demon, no one would suspect he was from a demon sect. But even with that reassurance, his father wasn't convinced. If his son ever let out even the slightest trace of demonic energy, the righteous cultivators would immediately try to kill him. Despite the warning, the protagonist had already made up his mind. As he turned to leave, his father tossed him a small object, some kind of charm or token. It was, surprisingly, an exam entry badge for the Chuan Tian Academy. If the protagonist was so determined to descend the mountain, his father figured that should be his first stop. Wasn't that the same academy that instructor came from? According to what the protagonist remembered, Chuan Tian was the most prestigious academy among righteous cultivators. Rumor had it that anyone accepted into their ranks could reach at least the Golden Core stage. Naturally, expectations were sky high. Xiao Yu, understandably, had questions. Why would he walk straight into the lion's den? The stronghold of the righteous sects. Wouldn't that be even more dangerous? But the father explained that sometimes the most dangerous place is also the safest. No one would ever expect a demonic cultivator to hide in plain sight. Plus, Chuan Tian had an overwhelming number of cultivation resources. If the protagonist wanted a shot at growing stronger, that was the place to be. Two birds with one stone. With that, the protagonist started gathering his things, though most of what he packed was for training, not survival. Xiao Yu, still curious, asked the father how he'd even managed to get that exam pass while sealed away. He simply replied that it wasn't her concern. He could no longer protect his son, so this was the best way he could ensure his survival. And the secret of the protagonist's body, as well as his connection to the demon sect, would be left in her care. After all, she was a nine-tailed fox of near emperor level. Zhao Yu accepted that responsibility without hesitation. But one practical issue still remained. If both she and the protagonist were leaving, who would bring food to the people left behind? After a brief pause, everyone started devouring their meal, knowing this would likely be their last for a long while. And as they prepared to go, the father called out to Xiao Yu once more. She sighed and told him she wasn't going to bring him food, but he said that wasn't it. He warned her that the world was on the brink of collapse and that the hidden power inside the protagonist would awaken soon, meaning her time was limited. Scene shift. At the Chuan Tian Academy gates. A huge crowd had gathered to participate in the entrance exam. Only those with special tokens could even attempt it. Most people, however, weren't focused on the exam. Their eyes were locked on a single person, the protagonist. He was nervous. Other than that one instructor, he had never stood face to face with a righteous cultivator before. And now, he felt the pressure of everyone watching him. And to be fair, how could he not draw attention? The guy looked like he was carrying an entire training gym on his back. The examiners, standing before a crowd of eager applicants, gave the instructions. Every candidate was to insert their exam token into the mouth of the stone lion. This ancient beast would detect if the token was authentic, and more importantly, whether there were any spies hiding among them. To demonstrate, the first person in line stepped up. When he placed his token in the lion's mouth, the collar around its neck emitted a soft blue glow, a clear sign he wasn't a threat. He was immediately allowed to enter. The protagonist, already a bundle of nerves, nearly lost it. If he was anxious before, now he was about ready to collapse. He started to doubt whether the token his father had given him was even real. Still, he hadn't practiced any demonic cultivation, so it should be fine, right? Just then, chaos broke out. The stone lion's mouth snapped shut around one candidate's hand. The red glow pulsing from its collar made it obvious. This one was a demon. The poor guy was instantly captured, his identity exposed. One random spectator, the type that exists purely to explain plot, conveniently informed everyone that the lion was forged from a special material, tough as steel, and enchanted to bite and hold fast when it sensed demonic energy. Naturally, that demon was promptly arrested. And then, it was the protagonist's turn. The examiner was already eyeing him with suspicion. Maybe it was the oversized bag he carried. Regardless, he had to place his token in the lion's mouth like everyone else. With shaking hands and a pounding heart, he tried to calm himself. "Don't mess this up," he kept repeating internally. The token seemed fine at first, but then the lion's glow shifted. Red light. A sudden snap. It bit down on his hand. In a panic, the protagonist instinctively yanked his arm back and ended up shattering the entire lion statue. The examiners were stunned. One of them, perhaps the same instructor, tried to make sense of what just happened. As always, the protagonist quickly apologized and even offered to glue the lion back together. Naturally, this raised alarms. The instructor accused him of being a demonic cultivator. Trying to save face, the protagonist insisted the lion glowed blue, not red, and claimed it didn't make any sense, but the instructor wasn't having it. The lion only attacks when it detects demonic energy, so why did it bite you? The protagonist started reflecting. Maybe just being around his parents for 20 years, both filled with demonic energy, had left a residue on him. Like secondhand smoke, the aura could have clung to him unintentionally. At that moment, Xiao Yu stepped in and ordered everyone to stop. The situation hadn't been properly investigated, and besides, righteous sects had a habit of being careless with how they ran their prisons. The instructor, narrowing his eyes, asked why someone from the monster clan was meddling in Chuantian Academy's business. Xiao Yu's reply was simple. She was the guardian of the protagonist. Of course, she had to get involved. Some onlookers whispered among themselves. Guardians were elite figures sent from great sects, tasked with protecting disciples of great importance. If this guy had a guardian, his background had to be serious. The instructor, now more curious than hostile, decided to verify the protagonist's identity. Looking at the token, he noticed something strange. It listed his origin as the #1 sect in the world. Xiao Yu confirmed it. Yes, that sect. The one that was supposedly destroyed by demonic cultivators over 2,000 years ago. And the protagonist? He was its heir. The crowd started murmuring. Wait, what kind of sect gets destroyed by demons if it's supposed to be the best? A particularly chatty bystander chimed in again. Well, technically, the sect was just named #1 sect in the world. It wasn't actually the strongest, just had a flashy name. Back to the exam. The instructors finally agreed that having traces of demonic energy on the token was understandable. One assistant theorized that the protagonist had inherited the legacy of that long-lost sect by accident, and given the tense relationship between righteous cultivators and demon clans, the matter had to be handled delicately. In the end, the protagonist was allowed to enter, but warned not to draw any attention to himself. Xiao Yu reminded him to stay calm. As long as he acted normally, no one would suspect a thing. Inside the academy, one instructor named Mei Yi Li was quietly observing the new recruits. Just then, another eccentric instructor appeared, hair dyed in every color imaginable, looking like a clown. His name? Huang Li Hong, but honestly, everyone just started referring to him as the clown. He asked how the batch of disciples was this year. Instructor Mei replied that while the group wasn't bad, there were a few standouts. Even the Rei Huan and Yuan sects had sent people this year. One was a girl named Baidi. Another was Tai Chan from Heruan. Tai immediately threw himself at Baidi, asking if she was interested in practicing dual cultivation with him. Not subtly either. She shot him down hard, told him to get lost, in not-so-polite terms. Everyone around them was impressed by Baidi. Turns out, she was the daughter of Master Yuan Bei, a prodigy who reached the Advanced Cultivation Foundation by the age of 11. The chatter was mostly there to build her up as a genius, with a powerful family to match. Internally, Baidi scanned the crowd, unimpressed. No one caught her eye. Instructor May noted that while the new disciples had promise, one in particular stood out, but not in a good way. Of course, he was referring to the protagonist. Meanwhile, the protagonist was just acting like he always had, training as he did for 20,000 years straight. To him, that behavior was totally normal. The clownish instructor commented that the guy had probably just reached the chi refinement stage and was trying to show off. Instructor May looked over the group of new recruits and made a blunt observation. With a presence that flashy, that guy won't even make it past the first round. He was, of course, referring to our protagonist. Then, raising his voice, May officially began the entrance trial. He introduced himself as the instructor responsible for evaluating the new students and explained that only those who passed all of the upcoming tests would earn the right to become disciples of Chuantian Academy. While everyone listened, the protagonist stared at May, struck by a sense of familiarity. May noticed the strange look and asked if the protagonist was trying to impress him or something. Embarrassed, the protagonist explained that he was just a little deep in thought, specifically about the rope tied around May's waist. That's when everyone else realized the instructor wasn't flying, he was dangling. After awkwardly lowering himself to the ground and then mistakenly floating up again, thanks to whoever was controlling the mechanism, May finally got face-to-face with the protagonist and whispered that he was curious to see what he could do, though. Baidi, observing from a distance, raised an eyebrow at the bizarre scene. What kind of academy was this, where even the instructors couldn't fly? Then, as if things weren't weird enough, the clown-haired instructor, the one the protagonist mentally dubbed traffic light, leaned over and whispered that he had just offended the worst person possible. Back in the arena, May tore off his shirt dramatically, announcing that the little stunt was just for entertainment. And now, it was time to begin the test. The protagonist couldn't help but think, was tearing your shirt really necessary? Meanwhile, the crowd was captivated. One particularly informed bystander, of course, began explaining. This was no ordinary body. It was the legendary sacred punching bag physique. What made it special? Well, it couldn't cultivate in the traditional way or use spells, but it had a unique advantage. It could absorb the energy from attacks and repurpose it as spiritual power. Basically, the more this guy got hit, the stronger he became. And to top it off, he was nearly immune to damage from anyone at his same level. But the protagonist? He just thought the instructor was a high-level masochist. That idea rattled him a bit. Had masochists evolved into cultivators in this world? Instructor May then laid out the rules. Each student would get one chance to punch him using their spiritual energy. He would assess their strength, potential, and talent based on that strike. What he really wanted was to humiliate the protagonist. This way, he could fail him with full control over the outcome. And who would go first? Of course, our protagonist. Sensing the setup, the protagonist calmly warned May to brace himself. He was pretty strong. May scoffed. Not even nascent soul cultivators could injure him. There was no way a newbie like this guy could leave a mark. The crowd chuckled, until the punch landed. In a split second, the instructor was launched across the entire academy, crashing through several walls. Everyone froze. Even Traffic Light was speechless. The protagonist looked around nervously. Does that mean I passed? Everyone around him took a few cautious steps back. Up on the rooftops, Zhao Yu sat gracefully, watching it all unfold. She smiled softly. I knew he'd cause a scene on the first day. Back in the courtyard, the bystanders were buzzing. How could someone below the nascent soul level hurt that instructor? Someone asked. Our favorite know-it-all answered, no idea. That scenario doesn't show up in the manuals. Meanwhile, Baidi silently admitted something to herself. Apparently, she wasn't the only one hiding their true strength. Then, the traffic light instructor commented, that punch. It was close to the nascent soul stage. At that exact moment, May stumbled out of the wreckage, slowly limping towards the protagonist. You attacked me before I was ready, he grumbled. And you were supposed to aim for my stomach, not my face. Naturally, the protagonist apologized. Still, the crowd wasn't buying it. Was the legendary punching bag body really this fragile? May insisted the earlier test was invalid. If the protagonist tried anything like that again, he'd be disqualified on the spot. To show he meant business, May activated his defensive technique, the so-called unmoving sandbag wall, supposedly the ultimate defense of his sacred physique. And with that, the second round was about to begin. The instructor turned to the protagonist with a serious tone. "This next technique," he said, "is one I only use during final evaluations, against cultivators at the tribulation stage. So don't expect to leave a scratch." And true enough, this time the instructor held firm. He didn't fly through any walls. In fact, his expression didn't even change. Everyone clapped and cheered, impressed with his apparent resilience. But instructor Traffic Light, still watching closely, knew something was off. Moments later, Instructor May fainted, while still standing. To save face, Traffic Light stepped in. "He's not feeling well today," he announced loudly. "So congratulations, everyone. You all passed the first test." The crowd erupted in celebration. Who wouldn't want to pass an entrance exam just because the teacher passed out? At that moment, Tai approached the protagonist. "Didn't expect to meet someone as strong as me," he said, clearly intrigued. "What's your name?" After introductions, Tai revealed that his real name was Zong Ma, successor of the 108th generation of the Rui Huan sect. He practiced a martial technique called Mountain Lion, and according to him, his favorite hobby was dual cultivation with others. Then, placing a hand on the protagonist's shoulder, he declared, "Judging by your skills, I'll reluctantly accept you as my sworn brother." Internally, the protagonist wasn't sure if Zong Ma wanted a brother or something else entirely. He was starting to suspect this guy had other ideas. Before things could get weirder, some of the background characters, led by the ever-knowledgeable Brighthead, asked if they could be accepted as little brothers too. Brighthead, introducing himself as Tianji, offered to provide accurate information to his big brothers and apologized to the protagonist in advance for needing to collect personal details, since nobody knew much about him. The protagonist looked at Tianji and saw a bit of his old pre-reincarnation self, awkward, earnest, and trying too hard. Then came the dreaded question, "Which sect are you from?" That stopped the protagonist cold. He couldn't exactly say demon sect out loud, but before he could panic, Beatty stepped in and interrupted with a fiery speech, declaring she would personally make him understand the gap between him and a true genius. Then she stormed off without another word. For some reason, the scene immediately shifted to a hooded figure lurking in the shadows. Classic setup for something ominous. Back in the courtyard, Instructor Traffic Light called for attention again. He pressed a hidden button behind him, and the ground began to rumble. Giant walls rose up from beneath, forming a massive square arena. Inside, rows and rows of robotic puppets. Wait, robots? In a martial arts cultivation world? Apparently, yes. The protagonist, who had trained in solitude for 20,000 years, was now being thrown into some kind of mech dungeon straight out of a sci-fi crossover. What even is this world anymore? The audience was clearly confused, and maybe a little afraid. Instructor Traffic Light, who finally revealed his real name as Huang Li Hong, not that anyone's going to stop calling him Traffic Light, announced he would be leading the second round of exams. The puppet mechanisms, he explained, were built by the legendary Kiao Pavilion and were designed to launch continuous attacks using hidden weapons. The goal was simple: survive until the incense burned out. Don't give up and don't attack the puppets. The more precise and calm your reactions, the higher your score. He added that this round was notoriously brutal. Some even called it the graveyard of candidates. With that, the test began. Chaos unfolded. The protagonist calmly dodged every attack as if it were child's play. Meanwhile, Zong Ma was moving flawlessly as well. His unique cultivation technique had him leaning backward with his back turned, claiming no one could touch him from behind. Too bad he got hit from the front. Traffic Light instantly regretted hyping him up. Beatty, on the other hand, was effortlessly weaving through the onslaught, even deflecting some attacks mid-air. Then she glanced at the protagonist, who was somehow digging a hole into the ground. "Guess I won't get hit this way," he said matter-of-factly. That really set Traffic Light off. This isn't a digging test, he shouted, furious. And with that, the episode, or day, came to a close.